The king waited anxiously, praying this legendary warrior would actually take the bait. Suddenly, an old man stepped out of the shadows, catching the ruler completely off guard. It was Swordmaster Cain himself. Demanding to know what threat was worth his precious time, even the king bowed down respectfully, relieved that the realm's strongest fighter had answered his call. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, the defeated elite knight slowly opened his eyes in deep pain. The king stood right over him, eager to hear how bad the damage really was. But before the knight could even speak, a harsh voice cut right through the silence. Master Cain looked on with total disappointment, ashamed that his student lost so embarrassingly. The injured knight trembled in pure fear, terrified to face his own master after such a defeat. Examining the shattered armor, Cain realized the brute had actually pulled his strike to spare his life. Cain pointed out that Catal wasn't just some brainless brute swinging wildly. But despite Catal's insane strength, Cain remained confident in his own elite mastery. What really bothered Cain was how Catal generated massive power without using any aura. The king gasped, wondering if Catal was actually a legendary warrior from the frozen lands. Everyone had heard stories about those brutal northern steppes, but nobody believed they were real. Cain began to realize Catal might not even be entirely human at all. The master envisioned monstrous creatures, wondering if Catal possessed the same terrifying bloodline. Shaking off his wild theory, Cain quickly reconsidered the situation with a calm breath. Because if Catal truly were a monster, he would have slaughtered the entire squad without mercy. Still, the mystery remained why a warrior from the frozen wasteland appeared right now. Cain wondered what kind of wild demands a warrior like Catal would make next. Cain told the stressed lord to stop overthinking and leave Catal alone for now. The lord nervously confirmed that the dangerous barbarian was still hanging around his land. Realizing the potential danger, Cain decided he needed to check on Catal personally. Meanwhile, outside the cathedral, Catal was already planning his very next move. The guard anxiously asked Catal what he wanted to do now that the fight ended. Catal secured his massive gold reward, gaining total freedom across the Lord's entire territory. Catal admitted that sneaking around without official papers would quickly get him thrown into trouble. The guard explained that Catal either needed a high-ranking noble sponsor or another option. He could build a reputation with the Mercenary Guild to gain total freedom everywhere. But low-ranking mercenaries are treated like trash, so finding a noble sponsor is much smarter. Instead of worrying, Catal flash-smiled and begged the guard to show him the way. Most people think being a mercenary is an exciting, romantic life filled with endless freedom. In reality, weak mercenaries are thrown into dangerous dungeons and used as total monster bait. The moment Catal stepped inside the guild hall, a wild brawl instantly broke out. One bruised fighter leaped straight back up, screaming at his opponent to keep fighting. His enemy roared back in rage, ready to smash him into the floor. Nearby onlookers just chuckled, placing active bets on who would win the brawl. Instead of a serious battle, the two guys started pulling hair like angry toddlers. Meanwhile, the guild receptionist calmly organized papers, ignoring the rowdy chaos behind her. She let out a long sigh, utterly exhausted by the endless stream of weirdos coming through the doors. Half the recruits were total lunatics or untrustworthy rogue thieves hiding behind fake identities. She desperately wished a charming prince would show up and save her from this miserable desk job. Right on cue, a massive, muscular barbarian strutted inside, looking around with supreme confidence. The entire room instantly went silent as the rowdy fighters froze in sheer disbelief. Striding up to the counter, Catal cheerfully announced that he was there to sign up as a mercenary. Terrified by his intimidating size, the receptionist stammered as she asked for his motivation. Catal casually mentioned that he needed the official title to gain proper noble status in the realm. He slapped down his entry fee, but when asked for his age, he admitted he had no idea. Shaking her head in disbelief, she just guessed a reasonable number and typed it into his record. She pushed across a freshly minted mercenary badge, warning him not to lose his official proof of status. Catal proudly inspected the token, thrilled to finally have a real footing in the Adventurer Guild. Eager to get moving, he leaned in close to ask what kind of dangerous missions were available. She slid a clipboard across the desk, explaining that these were the only jobs open to a beginner. But when Catal looked at the page, he couldn't believe how pathetic the options were. The paper was full of embarrassing low-ranked chores like cleaning basements, sweeping streets, and gathering herbs. Rosa began sweating bullets, terrified that the giant warrior's pride would make him snap and throw a fit. She quickly stammered that he could unlock real quests later, but Catal interrupted to pick one right away. Without a second thought, he pointed his massive finger straight at the herb-gathering mission. Rosa stammered in utter shock, completely stunned that this terrifying giant was totally fine, picking flowers. Catal casually asked where to find the herbs, completely unbothered by the low-level task. Rosa quickly showed him a reference card so he would know exactly what to look for. With the card in hand, Catal cheerfully headed out, leaving Rosa still completely bewildered. She stared in disbelief, wondering how such a terrifying warrior could be so ridiculously chill. Deep in the forest, Catal carefully compared the reference picture to the actual red plants. He noticed these healing herbs looked a bit strange, but knew they were extremely useful. Equipping his straw hat for sun protection, the veteran warrior was ready to master his first quest. An hour later, a giant sack bursting with herbs slammed right onto the guild desk. Rosa gasped in shock, wondering if he had secretly raided the entire forest in one go. Catal proudly flexed, boasting that despite his massive size, he actually had a delicate touch. Rosa handed over a single silver coin, barely enough to buy a basic meal. Even so, earning his very first coin through honest hard work actually touched his heart. Instead of complaining about the tiny pay, Catal cheerfully asked for his next job immediately. Looking genuinely thrilled with his tiny reward, he wanted to finish as many quests as possible before sunset. He began checking off every low-level cleaning chore available on the guild request board. Watching him blaze through chores, Rosa began to wonder if this terrifying barbarian just loved sweeping. Arriving at his next job, Catal greeted the owner with a big, friendly smile. But the poor woman almost fainted when she realized a giant barbarian was standing in her room. He effortlessly stacked heavy wooden crates like light boxes, then swept the dusty streets with unmatched power. He put his whole heart into sweeping every single corner, completely spotless. Watching from afar, the spy was utterly baffled by this giant's weird passion. Heading straight back to the receptionist, Catal dropped his completed quest bag. Inside was his hard-earned pay for finishing 15 different chores in one day. Rosa handed over 15 silver coins, completely amazed by his insane work ethic. Thrilled with his reward, Catal cheerfully promised to return for more work tomorrow. Walking through town, his massive frame intimidated everyone passing by on the street. Nearby, the librarian looked up in shock as a huge shadow entered the room. Even though he looked like a dangerous monster, he politely asked to read quietly. Settling into a chair, the giant barbarian happily immersed himself in reading books. The librarian couldn't take her eyes off him, wondering why a giant barbarian was calmly studying. Watching from the shadows, the old spy couldn't wrap his head around seeing a wild barbarian acting so educated. He began to wonder if this young warrior was truly special compared to the rest of his dangerous kind. Flipping through the pages, Catal focused entirely on learning about the current history of this new world. He recalled how Milena went off to sell weapons during the war, which meant the Empire had actually won. With their victory, the Empire had expanded massively and turned neighboring lands into helpless vassal states. They were taking over entire kingdoms one by one, showing zero signs of stopping their ruthless march. Thinking about their quest for total world conquest, Catal remained totally unbothered by their massive power. Turning the page, he started reading a detailed record about all the mythical non-human species living in the world. The book described incredible places like the dwarven crystal caves, hidden fairy villages, and floating cities in the sky. He then read about the hidden elven sanctuary, a sacred realm no ruler could ever find. Realizing he met the requirements, Catal smirked, knowing he possessed the key to enter it. Flipping the page, he learned about 5 massive demon zones filled with terrifying, unnatural monsters. First was the Silent Forest, a creepy woodland where all sound was swallowed by dead silence. Next was the Abyss, a blazing hellscape ruled by demons eager to drag everything into evil. Beyond that lay the deep sea, an ocean realm where land creatures somehow survived underwater. Then came the Endless Hollow, a terrifying void of darkness that completely erased everything inside. Finally, the book mentioned the harsh white snowfield, a frozen land filled with deadly warriors. Catal leaned back in surprise, totally blown away by how massive this new world really was. Closing his books, Catal stood up to leave, making the nervous librarian jump in surprise. He thanked the librarian with a confident smile after getting all the information he needed. She nervously stammered back, completely overwhelmed by his intense and powerful presence. Heading over to the reception desk, Catal casually asked what new quest requests were available today. Meanwhile, Swordmaster Cain watched him secretly from the shadows, realizing he had to confront Catal directly. As night fell over the city, the streets grew quiet under the glowing full moon. Catal strolled back happily after knocking out another huge batch of guild requests. He knew that at this rapid pace, everyone would soon respect him as a true mercenary. Suddenly, a mysterious hooded figure stepped out into the alley, blocking his path entirely. Cain cast a heavy, threatening pressure over the narrow street, locking eyes with the young warrior. But instead of freaking out, Catal stood his ground, demanding to know who was tailing him. Cain was completely baffled since he had suppressed his presence to total stealth. Catal braced himself for a fight, assuming this creepy old man was just a bandit. That misunderstanding left the legendary swordmaster utterly speechless and bewildered. Since Cain stayed silent, Catal felt even more confident that his guess was right. Cain panicked internally, wondering if Catal would even believe he was a renowned master. Instead, Catal teased him for resorting to petty street crime at such an advanced age. He realized capturing a thief would look amazing on his official guild record. Cain flinched back in shock as a sudden wave of dangerous pressure hit him. Dropping his casual smile, Catal lowered his head with terrifying combat aura. Before Cain could even react, Catal completely vanished right from plain sight. Before Cain could even react, Catal materialized directly behind him like a looming shadow. His massive hand reached down, aiming straight for Cain's neck with terrifying speed. Cain barely managed to slip away, sensing the attack at the very last second. Surprised by the quick escape, Catal could not help but grin in pure excitement. Cain stared in utter disbelief, realizing this kid possessed zero magical aura whatsoever. Moving that fast purely with raw physical strength seemed completely impossible for any ordinary human. Realizing the danger, Cain charged back in, pouring every ounce of power into his strike. But Catal casually sidestepped the incoming assault, leaving Cain completely swinging at empty air. Before Cain could recover, Catal clamped down on his wrist with an iron grip. Cain gasped in pain, feeling as if his arm was locked inside a solid mountain. Cain grit his teeth in absolute agony, stunned by the sheer physical power pressing down on him. Refusing to go down without a fight, Cain flared his mana to maximum intensity to break free. In a split second, Cain unleashed a sudden burst of energy right into Catal's chest. The force of the explosion pushed Cain backward, letting him finally create some distance between them. He glanced down at his glowing hand, completely baffled by how easily Catal survived the blast. Meanwhile, Catal just stood there looking relaxed, still casually mistaking the veteran warrior for a common bandit. Cain realized this kid was using high-level mana manifestation, a secret technique reserved only for elite masters. A blast like that was meant to tear through solid steel, leaving normal humans completely obliterated. Yet Catal stood right in front of him completely unbothered, without even a scratch on his body. Trembling in shock, Cain backed away, convinced that Catal was relying on some kind of cheat code. Realizing his magic was useless, Cain decided to draw his sword and rely on raw blade skills instead. But before he could pull it out, Catal casually tapped the pommel with a single finger, locking it in place. Cain tried with all his strength, but he couldn't move the blade even a single millimeter against Catal's finger. That was when Catal's overwhelming pressure flared up, making Cain feel like he was standing before a total monster. The intense aura completely shattered Cain's spirit, leaving him trembling without any way to fight back. Accept his defeat. Cain braced himself for the worst, fully convinced his life was about to end. Instead of wiping him out, Catal just scooped the unconscious old man up like a helpless little kitten. Right on cue, a city guard walked over, totally stunned by the absurd scene unfolding in front of him. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw a barbarian casually dangling the legendary Swordmaster Cain in midair. Panicking internally, the guard wondered if this crazy barbarian had actually just defeated one of the realm's greatest heroes.